something that we did look at when we were putting the track together was, as I said at the beginning, like trying to keep it relevant for whatever size company it is that's coming in. And then one of the things that got suggested, then which Matt stood up for, is for Microsoft to talk about how to do testing on a shoestring budget. Right. So with that in mind, this is exactly one of the speeches that we wanted to get up. So Matt, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you. Microsoft, known for shoestring budgets, so I figured that made the most sense. Just real quickly, we're going to talk about a few things today. Understanding your product, not just the game, before you even think about how you're going to test the thing. How you control the level of engagement you're going to have in your product, and maybe that's a larger long-term project. Maybe that's a lot of smaller short-term projects. But we're going to talk about ways and different options you have as far as how you can sort of control your investment, the amount of time that you spend testing something. Talk about evaluating some vendors. Vendors are a great option. I think everybody here knows that the games industry, from a gross revenue standpoint, generates as much or more revenue annually than the other entertainment industries. That being TV and sports and music. It's a hungry industry. There's a lot of people that want to participate, so vendors are a great option. I want to talk about how to utilize your player before you release your product. There's a lot that you can learn from them, and there's a lot of ways that you can motivate them. And we'll just take a little Q&A. Real quick, just about myself. I'm a test manager with Microsoft Game Studios. I'm currently responsible for Xbox Live Arcade, games for Xbox Live on Windows Phone, and games for Xbox Live on the soon-to-be-released Windows 8 platform. Previously, and I thought it was sort of interesting, given the nature of today's games a little bit more, I've done a lot of work in safety and security at Microsoft, primarily anti-malware, but a lot of readiness and uptime and availability. I worked on Microsoft casual games. I supported their multiplayer platform for quite some time, single-player games, and then Zone.com back in the day, which was the multiplayer platform for all of our retail box product that came out of Microsoft. So I do have a relative spread across a lot of different platforms, and a lot of different types of products that are all considered maybe by some people small. Xbox Live Arcade, it's sort of growing a little bit. It's sort of maybe what you call second-tier content these days. It's not AAA in the traditional retail sense, but there are the AAA digital products today. Phone games, obviously, we all realize that those can be very impactful. Think of Blazing Birds, right? Angry Birds, not Blazing Birds. That's a terrible XBLA game. No one made that game here. Okay. Sorry. No, but Angry Birds, huge revenue generation. It's on every platform there is out there. You can probably play it on a phone, on a watch somewhere. But super small development budget. And some of the challenges with those small products are constraining the amount of money that you're going to spend on them. Because at the end of the day, as much as quality is paramount in my world, I also understand that revenue is paramount. Right? We don't get the opportunity to continue being great with our quality practices if we can't continue to sustain our business. Couple things to note as we talk through this deck. So I'm going to talk about ideas and concepts. They're certainly not radical. They're things that we all know. They're things that we all understand. But putting them together in this talk, in this deck, as a collection that you can go back to and kind of think through, maybe it'll help you think about some options when you're looking at how do I really stay to that price point that I'm thinking about, or that time investment I'm thinking about. And the deck is full of examples that are meant to convey the ideas. But they're not recommended solutions specifically. Every game is unique. Every development project has a different budget, has different challenges, has different marketing needs, whatever it might be. And so keep in mind that these are generals, and none of them, I would say, take this as it is and put it on your product and you'll be successful. First thing, most importantly, before you, at least in my mind, before you ever jump into even a test strategy or thinking about how am I going to test this thing, is understanding the product. And there's a difference between understanding the game and then knowing the product. Knowing the game, these are things that we all get. The architecture of the game. What are our tools? What's our infrastructure? How's the source and the build layout going to look? What kind of middleware are we using and how are we leveraging that? What kind of content ingestion or back-end services do we have? Those sort of things. Game design, we all understand that too, right? What are the key design pillars? What are the things that we're trying to do in this game? What are the player motivations? What's the balance? All those different things that are sort of listed here. How's the game going to live on once we release it? Are we going to have add-on content? Are we going to refresh features? Is there an in-game economy? Is it microtransaction? Do we have consumables, right? Are we going to look at a lot of telemetry that we're getting from the game and make decisions about how to kind of change it on the fly? Are we going to have sequels? Is it episodic, right? Understanding the longevity of the game helps you understand not only how you're going to need to invest from a test standpoint for the base release, but then what sort of sustained engineering you're going to need to do beyond that. And then risk mitigation, right? In knowing the game, maybe you're looking at an aggressive schedule, which quite often I am. In my world, arcade, present day, we've got about 60 games in active development. We've got about 40 phone products in active development. And on the Windows 8 side, it's very large. That's a lot of things, and my team is about 30 people. So we're always looking at ways to make sure that we're spending the right amount of time, but not an exorbitant amount of time on a product. You might be dealing with a new technology that you haven't worked with before. You might be working with a new relationship, a new partner, a new third-party dev, in my case, quite often. You might have inexperience with a platform that you're thinking about shipping to. Maybe this is the first time you put a game out on Facebook, or you've never done a tablet thing, or you've never worked in the iOS marketplace at all. You haven't. There's a lot of different things. You might be dealing with inexperience, and you might be working in a game that is entirely motivated by profit. I think Chris mentioned a couple times, executives are executives and they own the decisions, and I totally back that as far as when and what we're going to release. Quite often, the almighty dollar is a motivator there. So we have to understand that that's a risk as we go into testing a product, because those two things are going to clash, and they're almost reliably clash. But then you also have to know the ecosystem. So where are you shipping the product? What's the platform? Are there release requirements? In the console space, in Xbox, we have certification. We've got TCRs, and Sony has TRCs, and Nintendo has lot check, and everybody has these sort of platform integration requirements. They also have policies, right? Those may be published, they may not be published. You need to find out what they are. You need to understand a publisher, if you're working with them, may have additional policies. You may have best practices that people are kind of forcing into a product. And you have player expectations. There's a lot of games in the market today, and a lot of them are Me Too, right? Hard to avoid. It's very hard to differentiate yourself today to a point where you're building something entirely new. That happens very rarely, and when it does, we all get super excited about it. But players have expectations about the game that you're building, right? It's good to understand those. You need to know what the competition is. What are their timelines? When are they shipping projects? How are they differentiating their product from mine? What's the history of the IP that they're working on? What's the developer history, right, of these products that are coming to market? Who are the devs that are building them? What are they known for? Are they known for quality? Are they known for other things? How are these things being priced? What's the public response been to them? And then also understanding in a specific game, what are the needs of the player? In almost any game, and these are just some examples, you're going to have common genre features, right? So if you have an RTS game, there's certain things that RTS players are going to love and want, right? And they expect. You have to have a clean golden path experience. You have to have frictionless matchmaking. You have to have easy ability to acquire content, whether that's in-game consumables, whether that's DLC that you release down the stream. But then there's the really cool things, which are the things the players want, right? And that's something that I encourage everyone to think about when you're looking at a game. Whether you're developing it, whether you're testing it, when you're a part of that product, look at forums, look at blogs, look at reviewer commentary on similar games, previous games if this is a sequel, beta feedback, demo feedback. Understand what the players want, because in test, I think it's actually one of our responsibilities to make sure that we're pushing for those things. We're an advocate for the customer, right? And at the end of the day, and to Chris's point, at times developers forget about the feature set, right? Not always, but it is very easy to get attracted to the shiny thing, right? Not that that's a bad thing. Often the shiny things become very, very cool and very powerful. But if you derail too far from what we plan to do, and maybe that plan including addressing this thing that we've been paying attention to over the past few years that we know players want in this type of game, well, then we've sort of missed that opportunity. So it's our job to tell the truth and keep us honest as we move forward in building products. You also need to know the financials of a game, because this is really going to help you understand how much you should invest from a time or a dollar standpoint into your product. So what kind of licensing costs do you have? What kind of outsourcing costs? What's your internal development? Do you have dev advances you're going to pay to a third party that you've outsourced to? What kind of royalty agreements do you have in place? What do those sort of splits look like? Just understand the P&L, because even at a very cursory level, if you understand the P&L, you can sort of work from some probably industry common starting points. So if you understand that we're going to spend $1 million to build this game roughly, and take out maybe some dev advances that you're going to pay or some licensing costs. Just talk about your R&D. If you're going to spend $1 million, you should probably think that, well, before I even write a test plan or anything, I want my net to come out around 10% of that, right? I tend to spend somewhere between 7 and 15% of the all-up dev budget on any title that we tested in my areas of Microsoft. Understand how it's going to be distributed. Where is it going to surface? Is it on the web? Is it on a console? Is it on the phone? Is it on a tablet? Whatever it might be. Is it going to be available for release or for pre-release? Right? Are people going to have some opportunity to look at it early? What kind of unit sale requirements do we have? How are we going to break even on this thing? Right? Do we need to sell 100,000 copies? Do we need to sell 5 million copies? Right? Understanding that is going to help you understand what type of product you need to deliver on sort of the P&L. Marketing. They're wonderful and they're difficult at times. Understand what features they're going to be talking about in their plans, right? Where are they going to announce things? When are they going to announce things? What are they going to demo? What shows are they going to be at? Are they promoting you from another product somewhere? Is a partner that you're working with, let's say I'm working with a third-party dev. We do some Microsoft marketing. They might be doing their own marketing too, right? And they might be talking about things and timelines that I'm not 100% familiar with or intimate with. I would still want to make sure that the product that we're putting out together meets a quality bar in that time frame. And then pricing schedule. That's also important to learn. We don't need to talk through this too much more. But what I'm getting at there is you need to understand the product more than just understanding the game. The second thing, once you know the product, is to sort of figure out how am I going to control the amount of engagement that I'm putting into this endeavor. There's a few things that I look at and I talk about as testing barometers at Microsoft. These are just examples. There's a lot more. But if you look at this chart, you could spend an enormous amount of time writing a test plan and then writing test cases for every single thing under the sun, fully test cased on the right side there. Or you could spend a fair amount of time doing directed ad hoc, right? You could have a dedicated team and we're sort of going to not worry too much about how much we spend. We're going to do the right thing no matter what, come hell or high water. Or you're going to constrain that engagement. I'll talk a little bit more about that. You might have full gameplay automation. You might have really rich telemetry and analytics. Or you might just have light debug hooks. In my case, you might be working with third parties who deliver built code, right? We don't get source. So I can't really instrument in the game. I have to figure out how to instrument around the game. Do you care about the code base coverage versus the gameplay coverage? Right? So is every arc and every method and everything in the code base executed? It's an interesting metric that you may want to measure. But how often have we played certain portions of the game so that we understand that we've gotten good coverage in that way? Those are trade-offs you can make. Think of those as things that affect time, right? Because time equals money quite often. These are decisions you should make with the entire product team, right? These aren't things that one of the worst things that I think can happen in a QA effort is to do things in a vacuum. Right? If you have a common understanding in your little team about this is what we're going to try and do, and these are the things that we're going to measure, and this is how we're going to sign off, and no one else understands that, no one's been part of that dialogue, you're going to find a lot of resistance and a lot of reluctance to your ideas quite often. So you need to make those decisions as a team, and you need to make those decisions before you even start writing a test plan. You need to think about your automation. Right? Is it an opportunity? And I believe Sarah, after me, is going to talk about how automation is an opportunity. It's very important. And it is. In fact, first thing I have up here is utopian automation and tooling. Skynet might be your dream. I went to a really cool talk by Georg Zeller from BioWare, GDC, in 2009. He talked about their telemetry system, which is called Skynet. And it's this, yeah, exactly, super cool. I don't think it's all-knowing, all-powerful. I don't think it's learning yet, but it's very close. But it's one of these things where you spend a lot of time, but you make that investment because you know that downstream you're going to continue to use that tool set to build more content and build more games. Right? There's a return on that investment that, sort of to the point that Chris was talking about, if you spend it now, believe me, it'll pay off down the line. But not every time do you have the opportunity to make that level of investment in a game. For me, quite often I look at something and I say, all right, how long is it going to take us to do it, the thing, whatever that thing is? If it's just a debug hook even, and I know it's sort of sad to have to think, is there a trade-off that we make around this debug hook to warm boot the game to a certain level with a certain build-out or whatever, right? But sometimes you do have to understand that because, for example, we brought Portal Still Alive a few years ago. We brought it from concept to the platform in 3 weeks total. and that included development and test time, right? And when you're in those really constrained, really rapid cycles, you don't have time to automate. And unfortunately, it's a reality that you have to deal with. So what's important now? What are the things that we really need to do? What are the things that we can afford to do? And how do we get the biggest return on that investment is a constant discussion that you need to have with yourself and your product team. And then you need to look at ownership options, right? Because maybe there are things that you can do, and then maybe there's things that your dev team can do for you, right? So maybe you don't have time to write unit tests in the code base, right? But maybe your dev does. I completely agree with Chris that quality it's a dev responsibility. And if you can motivate your development partner, whether that's an internal at your studio, whether that's a partner that you're working with, to really understand and believe that, if you can get an awful lot out of them too. And then you need to look at your available skill set too, right? So there's the things that we can do. Now, can we really do them? If you don't have those SStats on board, quite often you're in a world where you got someone that can maybe do a little bit of scripting, maybe a guy that's written like a batch script once in a while. Well, that's really maybe not going to solve your needs. So you need to look at your available skill set. A lot of the possible realities that I end up dealing with are a very light level of automation, and that's something like just some debug hooks, right? We might do then a medium level of instrumentation where we have some BVT checks that are automated nightly. You might have some performance, but it's very limited. Frame rate sort of stuff, just over time through levels. You might have some play telemetry that's coming in from some instrumentation that you did. But you don't have what is the heavy end, which is the ideal. It's the thing that we always want to do. I want to do full gameplay automation, and I want to get a bunch of telemetry, and I want to do analytics across that data to tell me where I should guide my testing, and so on and so forth. And then in the world of today, where we've got a lot of things which are games as services, Big Fish announced today, I think it's Big Fish Unlimited, right? So they've got this cloud-based service now, right? Cloud, server, blah, 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 all this stuff. It's really, really challenging, right? And you've got these availability and uptime metric that you need to think about. And you've got the ability to really detriment a product by having a service that doesn't support it well. So you have to think about scalability and soak and duration and mean time to failure and mean time to recovery. Some other things you can use, and this is going to be really tough to see because I assumed that the screen was going to be bigger. I apologize. Thanks, Ben. No, it's not Ben's fault. I just thought it would be a lot bigger. I can barely read it on this screen, so we'll see how it goes. But the idea here is something that Chris mentioned also. These are some example milestones, right? So prototype, pre-production, production, and post-release. What I've got here is content, client, server, and these are price 0 and the severity of bugs. And whether you use A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, or whatever it might be, whether it's priority, severity. What I'm saying is, per milestone, you might want to have an agreed to different set of kind of bug bars that you look at, right? Are we going to file Pry 0, Sev 0 content bugs in prototype? Yeah, in this case we might, right? Are we going to file, Pry 3 or Pry 2 Sev 3 client content server bugs at that time? No, because no one's going to look at them and the code base is going to change pretty dramatically, so why do it then? But as you see, as you move through, you get more aggressive about what we file and then what we also fix. Production, you got an awful lot, and then post-release, which is something a lot of people don't think about. How often are we going to look at the game that's out there, and if we find problems, how are we going to address them? Or what types of things are we going to fix, and what types of things are we just going to let be until there's enough of them that there's public outcry? But coming up with fluid defect bars, and whether that's on a sprint, or whether that's on a milestone, or whether it's just in this half of our dev cycle and this half of our dev cycle, it's definitely a very valuable tool. But it is one of those dialogues that you need to have with your development team, your production team, and your test team, the triad, if you will, to make sure that you agree to it. And you have to be willing to change them too, because products will change. What kind of globalization do you need to do? And how's localization going to impact you? This is something that can really change the face of how much testing you've got, and everybody knows it. Where are you shipping? Right? How many regions are you shipping to? Do we need to do geopolitical reviews? Who's going to do those? We ship into Germany. Well, we can't have red blood. We have to have green blood. Right? There's those type of things that we need to be able to check. Right? Are there applicable ratings that we need to make sure that we have? And is that the test team's responsibility to make sure that they're displayed appropriately in the game, and they have the right descriptors, or not even just in the game, in the surface point for it, in the marketing text on the website, or whether it's on the console or whatever? Is that the test team's responsibility? You need to understand that. Who's doing that loc work? Right? You might have text that's loced. You might have VO that's loced. VO is a tough thing to test when it's loced. right? So is the localization company or team or whoever going to do that, or do you need to do that? And if you do need to do it, okay, well, shoot, are we gonna do just kind of spot checking, right? Some of the SKUs, make sure that it sounds sort of Germany and it plays, right? You could do that, or you might need to really get native speakers on board and play that whole thing before it releases to make sure that there's nothing that's sort of going to be bad PR for you. And what can you automate? That's a huge thing, right? You've got a lot of menus in games, you've got a lot of options, and a lot of that can be automated. You can certainly walk through it, take a look at it, match it up to string resources, so on and so forth. So looking at automation as far as localization goes is an important thing. But thinking about some of these things help you understand what type of team type you're going to need. Also, bigger screen. I thought that would go all the way across the top. That says right. What type of team type is right? So this is 3 examples. There are a lot of different examples of a test team, right? It could be a couple guys that are actually part of the dev team that are looking at the code every 3 days or so, right? It could be buddy check-ins. That could be your testing. It could be you actually have a test team. It could be you have test sets. You could have a vendor partner who's doing something. But what I've got here, and this is going to be hard to read again, this says I've got a single test team, but it's constrained engagement. I'll talk through that. This is a single team that's dedicated throughout the longevity of the development cycle. And down here, we've got multiple teams. And the way that I look at these is that, well, this is going to cost us the least because we have the least amount of time that we're engaged on something. This is going to cost us the most because it's my team. It's the people that I tend to pay the most money to. And they're engaged all the time throughout the product. But if I look at a vendor solution, okay, well, maybe I can get this same level of engagement, but I can get this portion of it for a lower cost. And that's usually where I end up. To be frank, about 50 to probably edging up towards 60% of the testing that we do across Xbox Live Arcade, the phone stuff, and the Windows 8 stuff. And we push things out to Steam, and we do things to web and all sorts of things. 60% of that's probably vendorized, and it's been a huge, huge, huge value to us. And we're going to talk about vendors in a second. But the idea here is with constrained engagement, these are tough to read, but purple is BBTs, right? So maybe you're not going to run BBTs all the time. Maybe you're going to do BBTs. Are we at 5 minutes for the whole 45-minute talk?
Oh, sorry. No, it's okay. We got an hour on this one.
All right. Sorry to everyone that's watching. No, I thought that was going to be a little bit fast. I was like, geez, no one's going to get the next slides. The idea is you've got dailies, you've got unit testing, you've got that just showed up for some reason. Excuse me. You've got unit testing, you've got milestone acceptance, you've got full passes, you've got regressions, you've got milestone exit, you've got soak testing, you've got load testing, failover. These are all sort of stress and performance things. You've got sign-off passes. These red things are sort of the entry and exit criteria of any milestone. And then you've got system diagnostics. And diagnostics, I was so happy to hear Chris mention, they're super important. But you may look at something and say, well, we're only going to run BBTs as we head into a milestone, just to make sure that the build's sort of cool and that we're not going to engage our test efforts on something that's totally broken. And we're going to do an acceptance test as we lead into that milestone to make sure that the things that we promised ourselves we deliver in this milestone are in place so we can test them. So you might do a milestone test there, and then you might do a full pass that's for a couple weeks, and then you might have a round of regressions, and you might do some exit criteria, right? And that's a very limited engagement. Whereas in a dedicated space where you don't have to, where you're sort of like, I'm just gonna do whatever I need to do every day, this green becomes whatever testing needs to happen. It's not necessarily we're gonna do this full pass every day, or we're gonna do this type of gameplay balance. We're doing multiplayer testing today. It could be any testing at any time, right? But the difference there is that we're constrained here, and that's how we save dollars. But I do want to talk about the importance of vendors, and I'll get to that in 1 second. But I do want to talk about a couple things with constraining your efforts. Very important is, and I've found this many times because I get it, but the people on my team don't necessarily get it, right? I know that we're going to do these 6 things at these 6 times, and we're going to do them for these durations, and that's going to equal this many dollars. It makes total sense in my head, and the quality that we get out of that is acceptable to me, but my team doesn't get it, right? So I need to make sure that everybody on my team understands when and why they're engaging, and for how long they will be. We need to prioritize our test cases before we write them. If we're going to constrain the amount of time that we're going to be testing, I want to make sure we're testing the right things. I would suggest, I'm not saying do it, but I would suggest Prioritize them, look at the lowest priority, whatever that is, and don't write those cases. Because honestly, you may not have time to run them, and they're probably not going to net you the things that are clearly broken in your golden path. Sequence your test cases before you run them, right? So if you're going to do a playthrough, make sure you get the biggest bang for that buck, right? If you've got to reset, if you've got preparation for a test case that takes 15 minutes, and you need to do that 6 or 7 times in 6 or 7 different levels, well, maybe there's a way that you can order that testing a little bit differently so that you don't have to eat that setup time throughout. So sequence them. Think about that. But as you constrain and as you get rid of those Pry 3 things, you'll probably tend to sort of swing towards directed ad hoc testing. And if you're going to have ad hoc testing, direct it. It's super important. By nature, people understand boundaries. There was a study that was done with 5-year-olds, I think it was, and it was on a playground. And I don't remember exactly what they were looking for, but I think it was social engagement with kids and how they play with each other. But the cool thing that came out of it was put a whole bunch of people on a playground that didn't have a fence around it. And all these kids went out there and they sort of just like stood in the middle, and they just sort of stood around and they didn't have any fun, and it was totally sucky for kids on a playground. And they paid attention to that for like a week, and that's just what happened. Then they put a fence around the playground. And immediately, the following day, kids went out there and they were everywhere that they could be in that playground, having a lot of fun, playing a lot of different games. It's because they had boundaries. They understood where they could go. They understood, this is the space that I have to play within, but I don't have any direction about what I need to do in that space, right? So give boundaries, give direction, but don't give directive. I think that's super powerful, as well as combining with it some information about questions that you want answered out of that directed ad hoc playthrough, right? So maybe you might have somewhere where you check in and out scenarios, right? The scenario that I want people to play today with the second half of their day is this archetype of player, right? And lots of people use different archetypes. We might have a Jane or a Toby or whoever it is, but Toby's a core gamer and Jane's a very casual gamer, and they play this way, and this is the type of things that they do. And Jane's very exploratory, and Toby is very skip through it and blow shit up, right? Sorry, stuff up. It's really weird. I've been on paternity leave for like 3 weeks, and I think I'm just dying for opportunities to swear. So I apologize for that. But you do want to give people sort of that directive, right? It's like, hey, this is the type of player that I want you to play as, and I want you to investigate these type of things. And that you don't need to give them much more than that. And you'll get a lot of very powerful information back out of those directed ad hoc sessions. Like VIPs, they're just people that use MSN, but they're people that are sort of vocal. They contribute quite a bit on our forums. They are people who love MSN. All right, well, let's take those folks. Let's take 50,000 of them and turn them into these butterflies. Now, these butterflies are people who are going to help us design and build product, right? At least that's what they think, right? And they are. I mean, honestly, they are. But that is the message to them. Become one of these butterflies, and you get the opportunity to help build the product that you want, right? That's a pretty cool thing. So establish a club and make reporting issues super easy, right? If they can only do it in one place, it's only available from like a web page that you don't have a mobile version of it or whatever it might be. That's gonna, those are barriers to entry, so to speak, and remove those. Make it very easy for them to give you feedback, right? Whether it's a bug or whether it's just a bitch, and that's something to be ready for. Make sure that mechanism that you're collecting information through is structured enough so that you get the things that you would expect in sort of a defect report, right? So this was what I did to get there, sort of how I set it up. This is what I expected to happen. This is what actually happened. If you can have them get you a screenshot, that's even better. But be ready. Once you do get motivated participants, whether it's a beta, whether it's something that's pre-release, whether it's just a demo, whether it's usability, you have to make sure that you know that not all reports are going to be valuable. Most are going to be, I didn't like this, right? This is stupid. Your idea was dumb. I didn't like this color, right? Things like that. But you rarely get, I was in level 3 and I've been paying attention to this thing and I went and explored this little side quest and this NPC came out, and then oddly enough another NPC that I didn't expect came out, and that guy started jittering a little bit, and I think that was caused by some sort of frame rate collision between these two objects. You won't get that, right? You'll just get, that was dumb. I thought it was stupid that those two things were like jittering. What were they, dancing? Right? That's what you'll get. So you need to get some human filtering in place. The other thing is you need to reach out and support those people that are giving you information, right? You can drill down with them if you're capable of doing it, right? But make sure that when people provide you valuable feedback, that you let them know it's valuable. They'll continue to provide more, whether it's in that game or whether it's in another game or whatever down the road. But also assure that you've got your bases covered, right? So you're gonna be putting your IP out potentially out there early. You need to make sure that you have security measures in place, right? That you protect that somehow. Maybe you can watermark things so that you know when they show up on a blog somewhere where it came from. And make sure that you have a leak response plan in place, because quite often one of the worst things that can happen in a beta is you've got this closed beta, everyone signs an NDA, and then someone's like, put it up on the site, whatever, and it ruins your announce, or it ruins whatever impact or message that you wanted to control. So make sure that you have a response plan in place for any of those times when you involve the public, right? Because the public is the public, and you can't necessarily control them. Day zero updates. This is something that we do quite a bit at Microsoft. I think most people do them. We all know that. Well, I don't know. Anyone shipped a bug-free piece of software ever? Nope. Right? Lots of times you'll find something, whether it's after you've gone to certification or whatever it might be. The thing's got a bug, and we got to address it. And you're gonna do it the day that you release. Don't look at it as you've lost. Don't look at it as that as a negative thing. Look at it as that we're doing the right thing for the player, right? But make sure that you realize you're potentially going to have those things to deal with. Do the legwork early to understand what kind of friction you're going to have in doing it, right? So in the world of Xbox, trying to do an immediate update is a huge pain in the butt, and I deal with it every day. I'm not saying it's the best thing, but that's what we deal with. Certification is sort of a hindrance to that, and we're looking at refiguring, kind of our paradigm for how certification works. But the reality is there's potential things that are in place that are going to make it slow, not just to get the release out there, but then also to get the release in the hands of the players, right? So is your release something small that can be downloaded quick, or is it something that's going to really require a re-download of a significant portion of your code, or maybe the entire game? How long is that release is it going to take for someone to get it, acquire it, and actually absorb it into their game? And then think about, are you going to do these day zero updates for fixes only, right? So this is a bug, right? Legitimate bug, or are we going to do a feature update, or are we going to do some sort of day zero update to get a feature in that we didn't have time to do before we submitted to cert, or before we submitted to whatever the thing is that we were submitting to? Maybe it was manufacturing. Understand that friction and plan time in your schedule to build those updates in parallel to your filing work, right? A lot of time you'll find that you've got a prize zero. It's a red flag ship stopper, but you can't stop the ship, right? Because your executives won't let you, or marketing has got a street date that they've announced, and you just don't want to get the PR around it. You have to ship. If you don't have time in your schedule, or you don't have the appropriate resources sort of cordoned off to be able to build and also test that update, you're not going to have the best success at releasing it day one. And then once you've got that update out there, realistically, you're going to need to keep people on the product for a while. A lot of us, especially dev teams, once we're done, we move off to the next thing. Test teams do that too. I like to think about having a tail of someone on every game that we ship, even if it's just for a week, to make sure that things stable before we move off and on to the next thing. And whatever, with your day zero updates, make sure you've got a rollback plan. Mean time to recovery is a huge thing today, and I'm going to make a nod to services in a second here, because I didn't want to get into them too much, but they are super important. Mean time to failure really isn't all that applicable today, because we're going to fail. Products are going to fail at some point. It's how we react to them and get back to the norm, and how quickly we can do that that's important. This is the quick nod to services. Again, that would say it if it was a bigger screen. The player's experience can be immediately and dramatically altered if you decide to design and test for a services paradigm. It's entirely true. And I think services are really powerful, whether you're building a very small game or whether you're building some huge AAA blockbuster console title. What types of things in your game can you abstract and can you update settings-wise real time? Is it enemy attributes, player attributes, item availability, a portion of a map that opens up after time or after a certain amount of play has happened as an aggregate in the community? How can you trigger events and the frequency of events, longer, shorter, things like that. Your instrumentation, right? Do you have a verbosity setting, right? Can you turn on and off certain events so that if you start to see this sort of problem, you know you have the ability to turn it on quickly and get logging about that type of information, or get crash dump logging or whatever it might be from a sampling of your players, right? Do you have those sort of controls and dials built in? If you can do that, it gives you a lot of confidence that you can release the product at maybe a little lower quality bar, right? Because you can react to problems a lot quicker. And that can save you some money in your cost, in your test cost, because you can take a little less time doing it. However, you need to know how much intelligence is built into that game and where does it live, right? Is it on the client or is it on the server? If it's on the server, that's a whole other thing that we need to test and something that we need to think about, and that sort of can astronomically impact your test costs. Can you automatically update some of these settings we're talking about based on player performance, right? Is the game intelligent enough to figure out that, well, almost everybody that's come up against this boss has died 15 times before they even got close to the solution? Can we bring down his skill a little bit or something like that? The more intelligent your game is, and the more dynamic it is, your test service certainly grows exponentially. And there's a lot to think about there, but there's a trade-off, right? It's more about the real-time reaction to the game as opposed to, did we get everything right before we released it and then we just moved on. Additionally, routine diagnostics becomes super important here, right? Knowing what's going on with your service, knowing what's going on with your back end, knowing what's going on with your players every day, being able to just click a button and say, test the whole thing, let me know kind of whatever data points that you want to know about your service, that you've got something that can always look if there is a problem and say, well, this might be the first place that you look. It's in your matchmaking system, it's in whatever it might be. Routine diagnostics become really important with services. Testing them is part of our responsibility. In the world of services, and that's why I say your test service grows, it's not just about the service. It's not just about the web service. It's not just about the underlying APIs. It's not just about the security around that, right? Or the impact it has to the game or the balance. It's also about the deployment of updates to that service. It's about the recovery time. It's about the diagnostics. It's about the tooling and the reporting and all those things. Are those things that you need to think of as a test group? Maybe they are. In my case, often I do. A lot of people traditionally don't think that those are test responsibilities, but I think in a world where you do have that that integrated production and test, yep. I got a little distracted by Ben, sorry. Whatever I was going to say was going to be good. So, in recap, just a couple things. Before you determine how you'll test a product, know it and the plans for it comprehensively. Adjusting some parameters can save you a little bit of money. Vendors are great options if well managed. Learning from your players is paramount, but instrumentation does have a cost. And then plan for the worst case. Hope for the best and be ready to change on a dime. Again, just some concepts. I don't think any of them are foreign to anyone. I saw a lot of people nod at various things. Maybe it was just sleepiness. I don't know. But regardless, if we have a little bit of time, I don't know if we do, I'm happy to take some questions.
I think we're out of time.
Perfect, because I actually didn't want to answer questions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.